you. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to try to keep it to some brief, respectful remarks about AI. And as Oliver pointed out, we're all going to observe the code of conduct. We will not have any personal attacks, naming and shaming, etc. But we must ask ourselves first, what is AI? Is it a path that leads to a sinister godlike intelligence that's going to kill us all? Is it an amazing utopian future where the computer does all of your work and you don't have to work anymore and all of our problems are solved? Is it an umbrella term, perhaps, for a combination of long extant things like pattern recognition and machine learning and computer vision and predictive text, with the addition of generative AI features like chatbots, like you might know from ChatGPT? We see it everywhere these days. It feels like you can't open up any news website or paper without hearing about AI. If you are in California, you may have noticed that it's been forcibly inserted into your university system with the argument that it's an essential tool that everyone must learn to use. Some might argue they are merely trying to juice their numbers over at OpenAI, which is hemorrhaging money, and anything they can do to make it look like they have more users will be to their advantage. Sometimes it even seems like the same 5 to 7 companies are all just trading billions of dollars together in a big circular loop that's powering the entire US economy right now, but that's neither here nor there. We're here to talk about entomology. Perhaps you've used it for writing already. Perhaps you use Microsoft Copilot or Grammarly for editing your own work for clarity and concision. Perhaps you teach courses where students may be using generative AI tools to produce their homework and writing. And you'll notice that, in fact, this is a usage graph of OpenAI's own data, which shows that their ChatGPT usage plummets precipitously at the end of the school year. But we have lots of uses of AI. It's not just for plagiarism and writing papers so you don't have to. It can also be used to generate images of insects. This is just a brief collection of some of the top Google search results that came across when I was trying to find reference images for one of the classes I teach at CMU. Christina, there's a nice Elaphris viridis. Here's some more iridescent beetles, highly plausible. All of us, of course, can look at these bugs and say, that's obviously AI generated, but sometimes people who aren't taxonomists also are looking for information about insects and may not be able to tell what is real and what is false. When it comes to using chatbots and large language models for support in our own work and research, you may notice some problems, like chatbots often give you a confident but not necessarily correct answer. They rarely say, I don't know. They will fabricate references. There are many legal cases where lawyers used ChatGPT to write their briefs for them, and they ended up making up wholesale fictional references. You find out if they're wrong only if you double check their output, which means you're doing the work anyway, or if you already know the answer, in which case, why are you using it? And there is a little bit of an issue with energy demand of the data centers that are popping up like mushrooms everywhere. But again, we're not here to talk about environmental problems. It's not like that's outside where the bugs famously are. There are some really remarkable successes that we have to admit. Machine learning and computer vision are actually pretty good in apps like iNaturalist, for example, which I'm sure many of you have experienced trying out. It lives in your phone. You can point it at a weird moth, and it'll probably tell you what kind of weird moth you have. Notably, the output of iNaturalist says, we're pretty sure it's this. Or we're not sure what this is, but it could be one of these, but it doesn't say it's definitely this taxon. And that's an important distinction. If you have a newer iPhone, it will also do this. You point it at a living thing and it will try to tell you what species it is. And I think that's great, frankly. If you build your own data set, you can do incredible things. Naturalis in the Netherlands is doing some phenomenal work using their own high quality training data sets. If you make your own training data, you can do great quality assurance, and that is going to lead to a much more successful product than something that has training data based on scraping the internet for a whole bunch of copyrighted or pirated information that's uncritically combined. And so I'm excited to see what Naturalis does as someone who is now in charge of a collection that is extremely full of paper butterflies that I don't want to identify. I am thrilled to see how well this works for our problems. And it only took us about 20 years to get here. If you remember Daisy from 2003, 2004, this was, I think, the first sort of exciting step towards being able to maybe identify moths. So with that said, and that unbiased, positive introduction from me, I am excited to turn it over to our next speaker. This is a helpful diagram of an insect that just comes up on image search. I didn't ask AI to make it, but there it is. But I would like to get ready for our first speaker. Do we have Nick Dowdy and Mackenzie Miner of the Milwaukee Public Museum with their talk, Use Your Words, Enhancing Participation in Collections Digitization Using Speech and AI.
And we'll advance the slides if you want where the.
Okay, thank you, Ainsley. Yeah, I'm going to talk about AI. I guess it'll be a more positive talk. But it is, there certainly is a strong component of checking results, and I'll talk about that. So for those of you who do not know me, my name is Nick Dowdy. I'm at the Milwaukee Public Museum. I study Erebity. I was really thankful for the Erebid examples in your talk, Ainsley. Thanks for that. And actually, this talk is mostly about Polythus, which is weird. I don't know if you planned that, but that's cool. And I don't really study AI. I really study evolution, systematics, anti-predator defenses, sound production, that kind of stuff. Milwaukee Public Museum. I just want to give a brief intro to this if you're not familiar with our museum. We are moving and building a new museum. You can see in the lower panel, that's our new building as of a couple weeks ago. We've got about 4 million objects in our collection. We've got zoology, botany, geology, cultural sciences. And insects, we've got about 1 million insects or so. That's a really rough estimate. So I really welcome anybody to come for a visit. If you're in Milwaukee, come check out the collection. Do it either before 2027 or after, or both, if you want to see the old building or the new building or whatever. So how did this AI thing start for me? Well, this summer I had this project called Moth Maps, and basically we have this summer internship program for students who are going between undergraduate and potentially going on to graduate school, and we pay them for a 160-hour internship. And I really wanted to produce some distribution maps for the Wisconsin Erebity, and that's about 252 species. And I wanted to use the collection's data at MPM, but I found out, making a quick assessment, that really we have very few of our Erebids digitized, except for Catocala, which we have a lot thanks to LeftNet, which is great. But other than that, we have very little data available to do some kind of mapping project. And so is this type of project, is this even feasible for a single student intern with this amount of time, with no prior collections experience, or even like much experience working with Lepidoptera in general? And typing it all out. So the traditional method of, you get your specimen, you pull out the labels, you're transcribing and parsing all that information into Darwin Core fields, getting it into the database that drives you insane every single day. That was just taking way too long. There was no way we were going to get anywhere close to this goal. And so I realized that just reading off the labels to Mackenzie, for example, was really fast. It was just getting that information into a digital format and parsed into fields was what was difficult. And I thought, well, maybe we can speed this up using AI. So that's what we tried to do. So the main questions here: is it faster to transcribe labels using speech? Is it less accurate to transcribe labels using speech? And then does speaking versus typing the labels require less physical manipulation of specimens? I was really interested in if we could get away with sort of touching the collection less if we just read the labels off the specimens. And of course, I really didn't know what to expect, because you have a lot of variance in how people have expertise with computers, right? So not only just typing, but whether they are familiar with Excel or CSV files or databases or whatever. And so I was really curious what was going to happen. And mainly my biggest interest was to know if this approach could help increase participation in the digitization process, especially for people who have difficulty handling labels or even like working with computers at all. Maybe this could be a good alternative. So to assess this approach, I had 10 participants. We had 30 specimens. Those are the specimens. They're Palthus angulalis, weirdly. I gave each participant 30 minutes of training just to get them familiar with both the exercise as well as like what are Darwin core fields, what is the anatomy of a label, that kind of stuff. I also randomly assigned each participant to either doing the speaking first or the typing activity first, just to see if there was an effect of like people getting better on the second activity that they did. I gave them a maximum of 30 minutes per activity, so total time invested was just 1 hour. And basically they were going through this unit tray of 30 specimens, starting from the top left and moving from left to right and up top to bottom, and either reading off the labels for the speaking activity or typing them out and parsing them and manually into an Excel document. And I gave them this Darwin core template file. And we also controlled, all the testing environments, so they were all using the same computer to do it, the same recording equipment, etc. For the analysis of this, so this is sort of the pipeline. You record the audio, you use some kind of speech-to-text transcription model. In this case, I'm using Grok Whisper Large v3 Turbo to do that. I'll talk a little bit about that. That turns the audio into text, and then there's another model that takes that text and then does the parsing into Darwin core fields. Now, if you're just typing the labels, you can skip that first transcription step and just import the text directly. Sorry, this is actually wrong. You don't have to do any of the AI. It just go right to data analysis. I would say like the special sauce here, most of this is off-the-shelf stuff, off just normal APIs, nothing really special. Although what I did have to make custom were the system prompts to really tighten up and control the behavior of the outputs from the models. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And all of this, I just built this kind of web interface for, so you could just upload your files directly into the web interface, get your transcription, or upload a transcript directly and get that parsed into Darwin core fields. So the biggest thing here was probably figuring out, well, how do you score this? How do you know if it's doing well or not doing well? And so I came up with a sort of gold standard transcription. This was me sitting down, looking at all the labels and taking all the time in the world to parse it as correctly as I thought you could possibly transcribe this label information. And then essentially, long story short, just using the Levenstein string similarity, so the edit distance between what was transcribed versus what the gold standard said the data should be. And then each row gets some kind of accuracy score between 0 and 1. And there's just a couple examples here of a row that is scoring high. I think the first one says row accuracy score of 0.99, and the second one is an example of a row accuracy score of 0.55. And there's a couple fields that are missing or they've been transcribed incorrectly. So choosing a speech-to-text model, basically, I just looked at the performance. How long did it take? And the reason I chose the Grok Whisper Large v3 Turbo is because it was way faster than the OpenAI GPT models. That's essentially the whole story there. So I really liked that model. It was super fast, and it was also very accurate in generating transcription from audio. The performance of parsing the Darwin core fields from the text, I didn't really try a lot of models here. I just went with sort of the latest model, the GPT-5 model from OpenAI. And it did a really great job, actually, of parsing it. The problem with it, though, is it's quite slow to do that. So here is a plot of the parsing throughput. So basically the number of specimens or rows that it produced per minute. And so it takes some time. It's probably something around 375 specimens per hour. So it's not terrible, but you can also parallelize that pretty well. You could just take chunks of your data and send it off to different requests and really speed it up super fast. The other nice things about this model is a really large context size, so you can throw a lot of data in there. Some of the other models, they would fail, like the request would fail because there was too much information to parse or that kind of thing. The other really important thing was to be able to produce structured outputs, and this model is capable of doing that. So really having tight control over what the model is allowed to output. And I think from this variance, there was a lot of variance in the processing time. And I'm not really sure why that was, but I feel like it was really more related to the load on the server at any given time. Like when I was uploading these things, sometimes they were taking a really long time, sometimes they were fast. And I think that's more on the service provider side. Species names was the number one hardest thing. AI really sucks at at understanding scientific names. But the strategy that I came up with was to introduce really strong guardrails. So essentially, the way to think about it is have to give it like a list of like, here's all the potential names that I could be speaking. You can only use these names. And if you do that, the performance is actually really, really good. In fact, if you add those guardrails, it's 100% accurate every time. Without those guardrails, it's all over the board. It's really bad. So don't do that. And this is just an aside. I thought it was interesting. Like some names seem to be harder than others. So maybe shorter names or names that are more common in the context, they seem to be easier to understand. Okay, so is it faster? Yes, it's way faster. So doing this method of just reading labels, transcribing audio, and then parsing that audio into Darwin Court, it's about 3.5 times faster. It was fantastic. Is it less accurate than transcribing manually? No, actually, transcribing manually surprisingly was less accurate than just reading the labels and having the AI do the transcription and parsing. About 17% more accurate than doing it manually, which I think that was surprising. And also the variance in accuracy was tighter as well. And these lines here, those draw from the same participant between spoken and typing activities. So each participant did both of these activities. And more or less, it seems like there's sort of a trend where people who had low spoken accuracy also had low typed accuracy. And maybe that's related to experience or something like that. Was there an effect of which activity was performed first? This was kind of surprising to me, but no, it didn't really matter whether you did the speaking activity first or the typing activity first. The results were essentially the same in terms of accuracy. And if anything, there was a slight but insignificant decrease in accuracy if you did the typing second. So maybe people were getting tired or something and making more mistakes, but it wasn't significant. Does speaking versus typing require less physical manipulation of specimens? Unfortunately, no. Basically, both methods required the same number of touches of specimens. And this is, for me, was defined as just touching the head of a pin. If you had to do that, then you had to physically manipulate the specimen. So no wins on that front. And then I wanted to look at sort of the big picture. So let's just say you've got a given collection size, you've got these two methods. How long would it take to use these two methods to transcribe your collection? And we have I just have these arbitrary cutoffs of like a personal collection size, a small, medium, and large. And clearly doing the spoken method is way, way faster than doing the manual typing method. So to do a very large collection of 4 million specimens would take you 30 person years to do with speech versus 106 person years to do with typing. So there's a huge advantage, I think, for doing the speaking method. And then in terms of costs, if we make some assumptions like minimum wage of $15 an hour and a 40-hour work week and 52 weeks in a year. So to do the transcription, it costs about 0.00067 cents or dollars per specimen. And then for the parsing, it's about 0.008 dollars per specimen. So even with the costs, it's actually way more expensive to do it the manual way than to do it with AI and speaking. And I think that's partly because of the labor costs. Like the labor is the most expensive thing here. And so the AI, you can see, excuse me, the costs broken down here. Even for a 4 million specimen collection, the AI cost would only be $35,000. So that's really not so bad. So in conclusion, speech was an obvious winner in terms of time and accuracy. Storage space for audio is pretty trivial. It's only about 667 gigabytes per 1 million specimens. And of course, now that the audio recorded, you could use other models in the future, you can always reanalyze this data, which is nice. We didn't have to introduce any controlled vocabulary, but that might make it even easier for these models. So we didn't ask people to say locality, this, year, this. You just read it like a normal human being. But if you did that, I think the results would probably be even better in terms of accuracy. For costs, so there's a study out there, and if anyone's interested, I can share that. But they looked at how much GPT-5 specifically costs in terms of water use, electricity use, and CO2 use. And to do 1 million specimens is really not, I don't think, that bad. It's 2.31x the annual drinking water for one person. These are weird units, and that's just what this study reported them in. A half a year's annual household energy consumption for a single household, or 0.2 tons of CO2 to do 1 million specimens. And that's less than it took me to fly here. So that's not too bad. And so I think these numbers are kind of within the ballpark of being able to use personal mitigation strategies to kind of overcome any issues you might have with these costs. And of course, if you're concerned with data security, you can use local models too. I'm gonna skip the slide about images, but I think images are really useful too, and they have their own advantages. And so I see these as complementary strategies. So thank you very much. Thanks to my participants for giving the data and the summer internship program for getting it started. I'm looking for graduate students, so anybody out there, if you're looking to go to grad school, please contact me. All right, thank you. One question. Yes. Yeah, that's what my slide that I didn't have time for talked about. Yeah, I mean, certainly that's a good path forward too. I don't know though, what the costs, the time, and all that stuff are, because it wasn't part of my study, but I think those are probably not insignificant, but there are other benefits to having, a visual representation of the labels as well. So it just sort of depends if you're going for, I don't know, super speed or something in between, All right, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Nick. That was fascinating. Our next talk is from Deb Pohl, featuring Deb and Jim in the Wild West of AI.
Yeah. Here we go. Hi, everybody. So I'm excited to be here. Hi to everybody online as well, and my co-author, Jim Woolley. And we're here to tell our story about our adventures poking mostly at ChatGPT. And both of us had university accounts, so they were not pinging the internet, for example. And we are comparing sort of our experiences and learning through this talk. How many of you have experimented with ChatGPT or something like it? Yeah, so a lot of the room. Nope. Okay. So to set the tone here, there's a Venn diagram, if you can imagine, the overlapping needs of a taxonomic community trying to manage their data, and somebody like the species file group interested in building the tools and the community strategy to help people do what they want to be able to do. And so setting the stage, the CalCID group, through the work of John Noyes over 30 years ago at NHM London, he was putting all this data in this database housed there. In 2019, it moved into TaxonWorks. Oops. So how does the CalCID group manage that data and build it? They meet bi-weekly and they curate that data together. They have parsed over 400 papers, nomenclatural acts, since 2019. So the graph that Nick just provided, you have to imagine this one in your head, right? It's taken 400 papers, it's taken them 6 years. Now they have a backlog of over 600 papers that are not nomenclatural acts. They are asserted distributions, they are life histories, ecology information, things that can help agriculture, right? So what are the tools? Community tools? What are the tools in terms of things like AI? How can they go faster? What to do? another theme in Nick's talk as well. So I started off with a very general query, and notice that I say something very specific. Please extract 27 associations. How the heck did I know that? I read the abstract, right? So I also asked for 3 columns. It gave me exactly what I asked for, and it was correct. Every single line, every single row. But then I realized, well, that's not enough. So the query got tweaked. I came back and I said, instead of being exact to the 27, I said only new. Please only give me the new things in this paper. But I was specific about the columns I asked for. And this was my thinking at the time. If I asked for specific columns, this would be a great idea for mapping if I want to then import it into a database, if I already have the column headers, what I want. Notice I have now the journal page numbers. One page number was different than what I expected. However, in the paper, that assertion was made twice about the relationships. And so the number was perfectly reasonable that it gave for a page number. So then I thought, well, let's keep expanding this idea. This is Jim's query. And he took my query and then expanded it. Notice here, he was very specific, telling it what page it should start and end on, where it looks for information. He also noticed that in this particular paper, they used an asterisk to indicate newness, new locality, new host. And then he ran it on this paper. And again, really clean output. And he looked at every single record and went through the entire thing. There was one row in this data set, one row, where the information was shifted one column. So that all the information in the row was correct, it was just under the wrong headers for one row. Then we were expanding the scope again. I was like, well, if we did the new host and locality data, what else can we do? So this was, can we take this materials examined section, which some of you now build in spreadsheets, they're all very tidy, but in old literature, this is the way it's structured, which is great, but we need to get it out. So this query is the result of a lot of experience and refining till I got to this query. And in this particular materials examined section, it got every single one of these correct for every value, except for 2 where there's parentheses involved in listing multiple species in that parentheses. And I had to structure the query and ask it specifically to pull those apart. So every single row is correct, every single value, diacritical marks, dates, the number of the sex, count, female, correct. So Jim tried parsing this as well, and his results varied at times. He was tweaking the queries I was writing, so he also was using a university account. Here, this is taking that query that I just showed you and applying it to another paper. And if we look back really quickly, you'll notice in this paper, I just ask it to pull out the materials examined section. I do not specify the column names nor how many things to expect. It told me, okay, I'm going to run this query for you, and this is what I'm going to give you. And it gave me all the column headers it was going to create before it gave me the results. And I was like, well, that's cool, because I could change those if I needed to at that point. And it also told me what I should expect in those columns. And here's the output. And one more thing it did that was really cool is, unasked by me, it pointed out errors. For example, it said, these coordinates can't be right because the minutes exceed, if you look really carefully in the yellow lines there, you can see an 80 and a 90. Those can't be right. But I didn't ask. So think about the way we review papers for people, the way we review data sets. So this worked in seconds. And how long would it take me to go through something like this and pull out the data one by one and read all the georeference data and try to parse it? So on every adventure into the Wild West, there are wonderful things that happened that you didn't plan that are marvelous. There are also unexpected portages where you must go around unexpectedly, but you learn things from that too. This was one of the times when Jim ran the query using ChatGPT version 3, and it, for some reason, answered him in Spanish. Nosotros no sabemos. And it also was wrong, but we don't know why. So to finish with a couple of slides to sum up some key points. This is a ChatGPT focused mainly poking talk. Name your adventures carefully in this particular user interface. The names are there, but they sort on click, and there's no date to say you ran it on this date. And so if you don't name them, you can't, it's hard to remember which one you did first, second, and third. Tokens limit. I was expecting everything to come back at me and it wouldn't give me everything I expected. And I realized that there's a limit it can give you back and forth. And you have to say, oh, if there's going to be something that exceeds the tokens you can give me in one reply, then please batch the output. And then it just gives you like 25 or 50 at a time, and you just put all those CSVs together. You're fine. Ask the LLM how to make your queries better. It made some very good suggestions. And you can write your own LLMs, and Nick gave us a quick example of that, and I'm happy to talk in our whole TaxonWorks species file group. Where are you? We're happy to, where are you out here? Yes, talk more about how we're poking at that. And a couple of slides to sum up. It was cool to realize that it was going to inform me of errors unasked, and that perhaps I should think about asking. That would be a good thing, and I can get something out of that. So it can become a partner. And we're going to be tweaking queries as we learn, and it gets better. In the process since last June to doing this, the models from 3 to 5, amazingly different in a good way. We're clearly going to need new user interfaces to do the kind of things Nick also alluded to about vetting the output. This is a partner, not a replacement. And we're going to need a way to understand who did what. Did the AI do this? Did the human do this? So that we can understand where the assertions are coming from. So on the horizon, you can expect things like, for example, inside TaxonWorks, where we're thinking about how you might see what's in your database on one side, and you might query using AI a bunch of PDFs, say, for example, and say a question, and you get back the results. And then it would understand or help you assert these names are already in your database, these relationships are already there, or these aren't. And then you could say yes, no in this interface and add that data. And this could also be the kind of transcription task that Nick was sharing. So with that, I hope I've given you lots to think about, new ideas. And thank you from the CalCID group, and thank you from the species file group. Come talk to us while we're all here. Thanks. Yes?
They're trying to have any kind of flag on data that's been stored this way, and they used to be.
So Ainsley asked for the people online if there's a plan to flag any of the outputs that we would get. And Matt and I and others, we have certainly talked about at length provenance. I was just recently on a Rutgers symposium about provenance. It's a huge topic. I suggest we all, for example, collaborate with our information science departments about this, because how to do that is not trivial, but known. I think it's also true in our talks, for example. I know at Biodiversity Information Standards Tadwig, we ask people to say, did you use anything like for your talks or to produce things? So to be transparent about what came from where. Yes.
Was it just looking at the internet, looking directly at your database?
Yeah. Both of these are university accounts, University of Illinois at Texas A&M, and they were not looking at the internet at all. Yes. Seconds. Yes. Hi, Derek.
Clarify on Mike's question, the new, that was newts were flagged inside the paper itself.
That's right. That was what I was trying to make that story about the difference between, I know that the paper has new things in it, and I could use the word new. And the one paper didn't refer to newness with the word new. It used asterisks, which is why Jim added that to his query. So there's that sort of balance between me trying to find a query that would sort of kind of work over papers in general. Yeah, it's an interesting little dance that we're doing as we figure this out. Yeah.
50 paper and then just get a bunch of readouts, or do you manually have to go through?
can you ask me that again? I'm sorry. I'm supposed to repeat it and then I was, yes, say it again.
Multiple papers, 20 papers at once, get the token or parse it out into tokens. And then like review it later, or do you have to manually go through it each and every single time?
I think the question is, could I have, instead of one paper at a time, done, say, for example, 20 and get the output? I would say the answer to that would be yes. This is going to be a tokens issue back and forth about what your accounts let you do, or whether you have your own system, the kind of thing Nick again was pointing out. There may be others here on my team and in this room have different experience. I think the key there is the last part. When you get the output, what's your process going to look like for reviewing the output? How is that going to work in our workflows? And we have work to do there clearly, but again, Nick's lovely talk coming before mine gives me a point to point at his and say, yes, you see, we're going to need that. You're welcome.
We have our next speaker. No. All right, so that was a fun talk from Deb. I appreciated hearing about the care that needs to be taken to craft queries to make sure you're asking the questions very precisely, as if Deb has a lot of experience with IT and digitized data. Our next talk is from Dunn about agentic AI tools in practice for searching biodiversity databases and how chatbots perform. So, all right, take it away.
Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Hey, everybody. I'm Dunn. I'm an invertebrate taxonomist. I'm going to be talking about agentic AI and how well it works for database searches. How do I cookie it? Ah, thank you. No? So, generative AI is terrible for the environment. It also disproportionately hurts poor people, people in underrepresented neighborhoods, and people of color. But I only have 12 minutes. I don't have time to talk about that. So here's what I'll say. If it works, then we can talk about mitigating the environmental impacts. But it has to work first. I think that's as fair as I can be. First, we have to talk about horses. Clever Hans was born in late 19th century Germany. He was a horse that could apparently understand and answer basic arithmetic questions. It was amazing. So his owner would ask him something, you know, like what's 2 + 2? And Hans would stomp out the answer. This is this incredible phenomenon. It totally revolutionized the field of, you know, animal cognition and animal behavior. Except that Hans didn't actually know any math. Hans was just looking at his owner for like facial cues, because when he reached the right number, you know, he would probably smile or something. And then Hans would, oh, I've got to stop now. And they found this out by just having a different person ask Hans the questions. And then all of a sudden he couldn't answer them. So you can think about an AI chatbot as being like Clever Hans. It's a mimic. You put in questions, you put in text, and it spits out text. It does not understand that text, and it's not supposed to, because you're supposed to use it to role play or generate recipes or whatever. That's fine. It does what it's supposed to do. Agentic AI is like we took Clever Hans, we gave him arms, and we gave him your computer password. Now we have given the AI agency. We are now asking the AI to run programs and write code and affect things on your computer. But it's still exactly the same data set underneath. It's exactly the same chatbot. It's the same horse. If you want to continue with the horse analogy, it's almost like there's blinders on. So we're focusing the chatbot to perform a specific function. In this case, to search databases instead of generating recipes. So the offer is that agentic AI is going to consolidate database searches. So usually you have to go to GBIF, and then you go to INET, and then you go to iDigBio and search your genera one by one, and it takes a while. So what if AI could do it all in one command? That would be great. Does it actually do that? Is the information it produces accurate? Maybe most importantly, are the results consistent? If I give you my prompt, will you get the same results? Otherwise, what's the point? So just a little backstory. Hi, I collected and digitized approximately 97% of the georeference data for all clam shrimp in the state of Florida. Approximately 8.4% of all georeferenced clam shrimp data in the world is mine. And that's terrifying, but I'm telling you that because I want you to get an idea that I know this data set. I know what's good about it. I know it works. I know it doesn't work. I know the problems. I've been in there. I've seen every single point in the Florida clam shrimp universe. So I asked the agentic AI to tell me about my data set, because who's going to know it better than I do? So iDigBio, we're all familiar with, online biodiversity database, 150 million records. I don't know how many thousands of other people's records I digitized in the 2.5 years I was working on this project, but over 1,100 of those records are mine with my data, and over 10,000 of the photos are mine. So I'm very familiar with this workflow, and I'm a contributor. And their new baby is iChatBio. It's a chatbot. It uses the same ChatGPT horse infrastructure, but then they built these blinders to put on it to have it perform supposedly integrated database searches. Now, I'm going to spoil the ending. Chatbots are not consistent. You cannot trust them. I have done my best to give you the process chronologically. Now, my sacred text, I'm going to tell you right now, I do solemnly swear that I and Dunn have not altered the raw data in between the making of this presentation. So what I'm saying is I haven't asked the chatbot something, took a screenshot, and then uploaded a lot more data to make the chatbot look bad. I'm doing this as accurately as I can. I can't control what the chatbot does. So, how many kinds of clam shrimp are in Florida? Well, I really hope it says 8, but I'm expecting it to say 6. And I definitely wanted to understand that there's 4 genera of clam shrimp in Florida. They're not particularly diverse. And the reason I'm expecting it to say 6 is because 2 of the species don't have names yet. And just for the record, all of this data, it's not all just thrown in an undescribed species wastebasket. It's all tagged and digitized, if you care to look for it. So, iChatBio, how many species of clam shrimp are in Florida? Well, the first thing it does is waste my time and wax poetic about the definition of a clam shrimp, which is not what I asked. So it seems to have trouble with common names, which is fine. I know it's a beta. I'm being nice, but that's not very plain language, is it? It's supposed to be plain language. I'm supposed to be able to say bees, and it understands what a bee is. But okay, we'll move on. Give me the clam shrimp. So it says 6 species. And that's what I expected. It ignored everything that doesn't have a species name yet. But in doing so, it skips a whole genus. And this genus is not some rare thing. And, it's found on 2 continents. I've digitized 4 records of it and over 50 photos. So that's a problem, because that's the reality for a lot of invertebrate data. But this is a learning robot, right? So I go, iChatBio, you're missing a genus. It says, first of all, I knew that, but thanks for telling me, in this obsequious tone. And then it says that the missing genus is Kizikis. That is very interesting, because Kizikis is not found in Florida at all. The entire family is not found in Florida. So where did this come from? Well, the correct answer, Paralimnitis, it's got some points in the United States. 4 in Florida, a couple in Texas and Mexico. But Kizikis has a lot of points, like a lot more, like 20 times more. But it's not found in Florida, and Paralimnitis is. So it looks like when you ask it a confusing question, it just sort of guesses. It gives you a probability-based answer rather than a fact-based answer. Because I didn't ask which one has more data. I asked which one's in Florida. But wait, there's more. Thanks, Ainsley, for these screenshots. Does it actually search multiple databases like it's supposed to? So Ainsley asked how many records of Scaphium beetles are from Alaska, and iDigBio says 47. Okay. So I checked iDigBio, and it's 46. Okay, margin of error, you know, that's pretty close. And then I checked GBIF, and GBIF says 93. So if I wanted all, why would I not want all of them? I would want all of them. I didn't ask how many does iDigBio have. I asked how many are there. So it actually didn't do that search. You can make it do that search, but you have to specify. Now I'm writing this presentation and I'm like, I'll check back in with iChatBio, my old friend. How many species of clam shrimp are in Florida? And I have no idea why this happens, but it says 0. I have 0 clue. It's exactly the same text, the precise same prompt. But okay. Well, I did just ask about a common name again, and I said I wouldn't do that. So we'll play your game. Give me Diplostraca, which is the whole superorder. It's like clam, shrimp, and friends. It wastes my time. Then it gives me a downloadable file. And for some reason, I download this file that's made by a horse that lives on the internet. And the file is very interesting. Included in this list of Florida species of Diplostraca are entire genera, entire families. The entire superorder itself is a species. And look at that, there's Paralimnatus that we were looking for. So it does know about it. And Kizikis isn't in here. So it's like it knows Kizikis isn't in Florida and Paralimnatus is, but it can't put 2 and 2 together. But maybe it's me, right? It's usually me. So at this point, I start asking a lot of similar questions to try and figure out, maybe it's like the suborders it doesn't get because different websites list them differently and stuff like that. So I start asking a lot of similar questions. How many families are in this order? How many genera are in this order, etc. Most of the time it says 0. There's no clam shrimp at all. But sometimes it gets it right, and it seems to be getting it right more often the more questions I ask it. Wait a minute. I am playing myself. This is a learning robot. AI chat bio. How many species of clam shrimp are in Florida again? And now it's 5. All right, interesting. And this is like 2 hours after I asked it and it said 0. Like I haven't even closed the tab yet. So at this point, I no longer feel comfortable asking this thing anything. Somehow it is sucking up something from my questions, something incorrect, and then spitting that information back out to me. Who knows the answer? So it completely defeats the purpose of an objective demonstration. You can't be objective with this thing. It is incompatible with science. That's the bottom line. And if you read this paragraph, it gets worse and worse, by the way. Like, first of all, it skips a whole order of clam shrimp. Then it lists 2 genera that are in different orders together. Then it mentions Paralimnatus, but doesn't put it in the list. Then it says there's no members of this suborder, even though that's what Lynceus and Paralimnatus are. And then it says, oh yeah, you know, the clam shrimp of Spinacaudata Lynchiidae. But that family is not in that order. That makes no sense. That is like saying, oh yes, ants are my favorite type of beetle. This is complete nonsense. Because the chatbot doesn't understand it. Because it doesn't have to. It's just a horse. It just mimics me. It's just listening to what I say and saying, oh, I guess you want this. That's all it does. And I asked about Scaphium again, and it said none. Again. And I don't know if this is because it can't find the beetle data, or because it's checking for Scaphium, the type of tree, and it just didn't ask me which one I wanted, and just went with 0. And I'm not sure which is worse. And sometimes I have no idea. I asked it how many species of bears are in Florida, which is 1. And it said not only are there over 5,000 species of bears, but that the true number is so massively large that the computer cannot determine it. Bears. There's 1. So, welcome to the future. Agentic AI will consolidate database searches. Does it actually do that? No, it doesn't even do the multiple websites unless you fuss with it. Is the information accurate? No, don't use this. Is it consistent? No, it changed its answer within 2 hours of me sitting there. But why am I here, right? Why am I talking about AI instead of shrimp, which are cool? Because I spent a lot of time working on that data set. You know, I worked on that for 8 years. I used to Google or GBIF search my own data to make sure I was putting it in right and that I didn't screw up and put half of the points in India again. But it doesn't matter how good your data is if you use AI, because AI doesn't understand what data is. Chatbots anyway don't understand what data is. They're just giving you an answer and it doesn't really matter. And this doesn't even get into what if you publish a paper with the false information in it? Who's at fault? What if it's something medically relevant? You know, I don't know. And most importantly, why is iChatBio giving us this tool if no one asked for it? Because I actually did attend one of their 5,000 daily webinars, asked if anybody wanted this, and they said no, nobody actually asked for it. I know why we're getting this tool, you know? I'm not dumb, I'm just a little nuts. I know how the world works, but if there's a chance for me going up on stage and embarrassing myself to convince somebody else that this really isn't good, I got to take it. You know, otherwise, what's the point? What's the point of doing any science? But what if I could tell you that right now, right this moment, there is a technology available that can get you all of the data you could ever want 100% objectively. No hallucinations, no paragraphs of nonsense, and no weird obsequious yes or tone. That would be amazing, right? What if I told you that almost every website that exists already has this technology available right now? That would be great, right? It's a search bar. Thanks, guys. I know I've gone over time. Oh, got you. Anybody got one? Don't leave me hanging.
Questions?
Thank you.
Alrighty, our next speaker is coming to us from Cornell University, Jack Whisenant, talking about using AI to parse handwritten labels and how helpful it is at that.
Hi, everyone. I'm sort of talking about that. So thank you all for being here. It is really exciting to hear about and see what's coming up, what people are doing to make processes that are the most tedious parts of digitization go faster. My main goal here is to learn from you all, because the TLDR of this all is we tried one approach for a particular project and it didn't work. So we tried, I'm presenting what we did instead to maximize our efficiency and our processes here. So I'm kind of squeaking into this symposium on the side. So thank you for having me. Just for a little bit of background, I approach AI very cautiously because my background is in art, music, education, and there's a lot of things happening, as we've already talked about, in all of those fields that can be troubling, or watching models train on artwork without artist consent, generate like ethical, societal questions about generating art versus collaborating with people and generating music, generating stories, and sidestepping parts of that. That's not what we're here to talk about. But yeah, I think I'm also coming hard off the heels of taking a course where some of the advice from the TAs was ask ChatGPT. If I had a question, they said, just ask ChatGPT. And I'm like, I didn't take this course to ask ChatGPT, I'm asking you. But so when I proposed this, my mind was a little snarkier than I actually am about this. So like, just to yeah, get a little bit of that. And I do want to just remind folks, we say AI is the fastest thing to say. This isn't intelligence, it's large language models is the better term. It is pattern recognition, which is good. Like we are all about recognizing patterns. When we say intelligence, that word matters because it's making an assumption of knowledge that doesn't necessarily equate to what's being produced here. And what we're using for is we're not asking it to intelligently doing anything. We want it to recognize handwriting. We want it to recognize what we're looking at and parse it into a form that we can use in our databases and move forward in a really fast, efficient way. That's very exciting. So if we have our pattern recognition software, let's use it to recognize patterns. That's fantastic. Large data analysis, that sort of thing is fantastic. So handwriting, that's probably the parsing older handwriting is lovely. And it comes with its own sorts of challenges. I personally am a sucker for nice penmanship. And I know there's a lot of challenges with schools not teaching cursive anymore. And so there's less recognition and less familiarity or comfort with dealing with older handwriting and older labels when we have students in our collections who haven't had that experience yet. So we have some handwriting labels, perfectly fine. You can read that. Any sort of program can read that. It's lovely. And sometimes it's a little harder. So it maybe involves a little more interpretation, a little more kind of context and broader, whatever. Honestly, I don't know how Crime and Punishment was ever written because Dostoevsky, what the heck? And then, so within the collection, we're transcribing labels. We're also looking at, Cornell has a whole system of lot books, which I have I could talk for 10 minutes on the lot books alone because we'll have a number on a specimen. That number corresponds to an entry, a handwritten entry in a lot book, which terrifies me. We're digitizing them just to like get them on somewhere other than just paper, duplicating these, but that'll be a whole nother thing. I'm actually hoping to use some of what I'm learning here to digitize the lot books in an effective and efficient way, because there's a lot of them. And then there's old field notes, there's notes in drawers. I really love that center note where my labels are still not done. I feel like that was put into the drawer maybe in the 70s, maybe the 60s, who's to say? And I have the feeling that those labels are still not done. So the small project, the specific project that we were using pattern recognition software to, I almost said AI, the pattern recognition software to try and parse these labels was specifically for a portion of our Odinate databasing transcription grant. And I was brought in partway through the project when almost all of the 15 cabinets of papered material and dry mounted material had been digitized just individually by students. It took quite a long time. But as we were coming up towards the end of the grant, 3 months left, the original person in charge of it realized that they didn't account for any of the alcohol or the slide collections of the Odinates, which is maybe a pretty significant portion of the holdings because that accounts for the majority of the types and the paratypes. And yeah, it was a little bit of a panic, figuring out how are we going to get this going forward in an efficient way to make our goal or at least get close without saying, hey, 2/3 of the collection we forgot about. So they sent it to me and said, let's figure out what to do. Because we have 12 cabinets of alcohol and 23 slide boxes to go through, most of which I would say probably over 75% of which are all handwritten labels. Of the sort where you're like, oh, I'll do that later. I'll make it nice later. And then they never did. This is not having to do with it at all, but I have to scream. I have to scream. Oh my gosh, every single jar, the vials were held together with rubber bands and somebody thought that would be a great idea. And it's slimy, it's disgusting, but we clean them all off. So now they're great. Never, never, never anybody ever use rubber bands and alcohol. I was crying. Back to the subject at hand. So in a way, we had a small army of undergraduates who were willing to work on the project, and we're bringing them on board, figuring out how are we going to get this done really smoothly. And so one of the people involved said, let's just try AI. You know, I have ChatGPT on my phone. We're going to try it. Let's take a picture of a few labels and see how that goes. And what we saw with it, this is a very small sample size. We didn't do exhaustive testing on the possible programs or approaches, or, you know, we were just like, we have handwritten labels. We're just going to look at this and see briefly so we can see what is the best course of action without putting a lot of extra developmental effort into training a model, which again, I'm going to learn about from more conversations with folks who have done that, and I'm looking forward to that. But in the time frame that we had, it did not make sense to put a lot of effort into that. We just went forward in the ways that I'll talk about. So when, you know, trying to parse these labels, 60–70% of the label was transcribed accurately. And again, the timeline we're working in, that was not really going to work for us, because if you have to go back and correct most of a label, 40% of a label, you might as well just do it right the first time. So, and then some things that we ran into when students were using some of these, the pattern recognition to try and help them transcribe, I was getting a lot of weird stuff in their database as I was combing through it and correcting things before uploading to our database. Some things were like, where did you get this information? This doesn't exist in this state, or like, why are you making that assumption? Because they would look something up, but instead of looking it up and trying to, work through what this label says, they would just put it into ChatGPT and take it, copy paste, and move on, which is faster, but it's not faster when you have to go back and correct. And especially if you don't know if it's not correct, and then you find it out weeks later, and there's a little bit of like stress involved of like, okay, we have to, yeah. If you can just imagine. And as was mentioned before, just thinking about how many of these inquiries are being made. If students are told to do this with every single specimen, which is not going to be the case, of course, in any of these, maybe, what is the energy cost of an individual inquiry? How many total labels are you dealing with? And just being thoughtful about that. And specifically with this alcohol vials project, we're carefully removing, drawing, photographing the label, putting it through the thing, vetting it, correcting it, and then checking it all that everything's going where it's supposed to go. It was just what we decided was to divide and conquer in a slightly different way. So we went back to looking at the handwriting itself. The lot books had longer entries of the same authors and the same handwriting, the same person. So we could say, put together a little translation sheet of here's how this person makes. These two little lumps are going to be both an M, an N, a U, an E, it's all going to look like that, but within the context of the word, if you know that you're looking for that general lumpy shape, you can get familiar. It's kind of learning a dialect, getting used to an accent, reading their handwriting. And there's also every label, as they were labeled with their species name, in general, it would match up with the outer label of the jar that contained the vials. So you have an automatic little cheat sheet of what their letters look like from their written description of the species to the typed one. And what we did, so we kind of divide and conquer. So, and where some students were focused on transcription, and some students were focused on just getting labels photographed and digitized by put a barcode in each label and get them into a database, a partially finished database, so then the rest of it could be transcribed by the students and remote volunteers and people who were more inclined towards handwriting interpretation. And with that, we also put everyone together in a little group system. So if you're using a system called like Slack or any of the project management type things, if you're having trouble, students would post a picture of what they're looking at, and then we'd have chimes in from, sometimes it was myself or my co-coordinator, or after a while, the students were actually helping each other faster than we could. And so it was a really neat sort of community forming, look at this terrible handwriting, or this one's really funny. Just like we've seen on the ECN group. I see it's so fun to see somebody saying, what does this say? Where is this from? Or I know this, but what about that? So using our community as a way to help parse this as well. And so because of the vials were not nice, all of these labels were kind of scrunched into the vials. So it's not like we could look at the vial, take a picture of the outside. Almost all of them had to be removed from the material, laid out and photographed. And from there, again, we have students who were maybe not as confident in their abilities with the handwriting interpretation. They can be on the pipeline of, let's get this photographed, let's get this in here. And so that actually became a very efficient way to process all of our alcohol material. And that is something that we were able to wrap up very quickly, getting things at least associated with the barcode and photographed, so then we can continue working on the digitization with transcribing volunteers and or running through programs that can help with that. And for a while, when we were putting together a little list of the most common and most difficult to read places, so that we had just a central guide of, if you can get most of this word, put it into our central locality document, and maybe you'll get close, and then then you're like, oh, that's a G. Okay, great. And then keep on going. So, you know, that'll be less useful, but it's something that we use to try and sort of channel correct identification. And since we have all of those labels photographed, we still have about 2,000-3,000 left to finish transcribing, but we could potentially put them up on Zooniverse, the Notes from Nature, which I first encountered with the Documenting Arthropod Vertebrate Parasites project, or the Field Museum flea slides. That was a wonderful thing to do in early 2020. Just sit there and look at fleas. It was delightful. Felt like I was doing something. But that has a big, broad reach. Anybody who's interested in Zooniverse can participate in a project like this. So I was thinking about that for the lot books, for the rest of these Odinate labels, and it invites anyone to transcribe, and you can set a certain number of times of transcription successes per specimen, and then it will concatenate, or like if there's agreement. It's all in the settings of how you set up your project, but that is something to consider as well. Crowdsourcing. Thank you. So one thing that I do want to mention is that even if the majority of the work moves to a large language model, which is, again, good efficiency, we want this stuff out into the universe so it can be used. But I do think at least some portion you should train students in doing a little bit of hand transcription, just to connect with the specimen and realize like how much more efficient, or if there's something that you're putting into the transcription, and connects with like that human side of the specimen, the collection, the history of it. I think there's something really well-rounded about that, in taking into account the whole care of collection management and caretaking, and just keeping connected. I think that's nice. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and I want to talk to you more and learn more.
All right, thank you so much, Jack. And our very last talk in this symposium will be Christine Johnson on unlocking biodiversity data with robotic imaging and AI-driven transcription of natural history collections. Take it away.
So yes, I'm Chris Johnson from the American Museum of Natural History, and I'm here today representing the slew of grant-funded digitizers and volunteers who've been critical to the efforts presented here today, which is to show how our modified workflow incorporating robotic imaging and AI to accelerate our workflow. And yeah, I'm using AI because I'm lazy, and my talk is not nearly as deep as some of the ones have been, but As everyone knows, here, our natural history collections are spectacularly vast, with specimens having been collected from all over the world on land and in the sea from yesterday to hundreds of years ago. These specimens exist in our collections with a variety of associated data, whether they're images, tissues, or textual information such as card catalogs, accession records, and labels. For the most part, the specimens and their data in our collections are effectively irreplaceable. Unless specimens are preserved in some substrate, there is no going back to yesterday to collect what was there then, and what may have been there yesterday may not be there today. This Rocky Mountain locust in the late 1800s swarmed by the trillions. By 1903, the species was extinct, and at least 58 species of insects today are known to be extinct, and it's likely that this number is higher. Hence, the specimens in our collections are not just dead insects on a pin, but objects critical not only for their morphological and genetic characteristics, but for establishing baselines, geographical boundaries, and distributions, and other conditions that allow us to determine the current state of our species. For many of our specimens, the associated data or metadata are still trapped in physical form, which presents a twofold conundrum. First, the data in physical form is limited in usability, and two, these data are at risk of being lost forever. Whether it's the fading of ink, degradation of paper, or even worse, natural or unnatural disaster. We now see an even broader picture and greater use of our historical collections and metadata. We can better understand participants in ecosystems. We can create snapshots in time of what once was, and we can make predictions about the future and preparations for the future. Similar to everyone's experience in this room, the process of getting our specimens from the physical to the digital has been a long one. We started with digitizers typing information directly into a database. From there, we moved to transcribing data from images of specimens with their labels into a database. Eventually, we were fortunate enough to purchase the GigaMacro robotic imaging system, which moves the camera along an X, Y, and Z axis. The original goal of this was to create a high-resolution stitched image of an entire drawer, insect drawer, and then segment the specimen images using InSelect to create skeletal database records with the data matrix code, catalog number, and taxon name. This still would have left us without the label data, but again, with 23 million specimens in invertebrate zoology, 15 million of which are on pins, the thought was to start somewhere. However, once the machine arrived and I learned how to use it, instead of doing the whole drawer imaging, I sort of reimagined the system to image individual specimens with their labels utilizing this grid system. The labels still need to be removed from pins or vials, but now we have a relatively high resolution image of the specimen and its labels. Once the images and catalog records are in the database, the volunteers then use the images to populate both verbatim fields and other standardized fields. This past summer, we made a major shift in our workflow and we replaced manual transcription with a process that combines artificial intelligence, machine learning, and optical character recognition to extract the label text. And the results were pretty remarkable. So I'm going to show you a short video of our workflow, and then I'll talk about sort of how successful the approach was. So again, the GigaMacro system, let's see if it's going to start. Hold on. Okay. The imaging system has a robotic arm that moves along this X, Y, and Z axis. We use this grid platform to produce a high-resolution image of individual specimens and their labels. We modified the lighting system a bit, and we use these bi-colored adjustable LED lights mounted on PVC piping to more uniformly illuminate the entire platform. The height of the lights can be adjusted with different piping length, as well as the angle, brightness, and warmth of the light. We created the staging templates from these gray yoga mats, which make it easy to gently stage pin specimens. And here you see Giovanni working on the stingless bee project, staging some bee specimens. Each specimen or vial in a cell gets a data matrix code made from polytag, which is also the catalog number. We use this number in the image to rename the image files with the data matrix or catalog number, which then becomes the common identifier in the workflow. This number is used to create the multimedia records as well as the specimen catalog records in our database, which is Axial Emu. So here we see Kyle staging marine invertebrates. For this, we carve out the wells to hold the shells and have found that the lighter background helps to highlight the specimens in the vials. Once the specimens have been staged, the platforms are moved to the base of the imaging system and aligned to a point, which becomes its like home base. And the robotic imaging, oh, and here, this is where the wells really come in handy, so the vials don't roll off the platform, which has happened. Anyway, the robotic arm is programmed to run left to right and then down a row and right to left, so as to minimize the amount of time it takes to complete an imaging run. Each platform or stage has its own software template specific to the number of cells and cell size of a grid. That first cell in each grid holds the scale bars and the AIM&H logo, and we kind of use that to calibrate the run so we can digitally insert the scale bars and logo into the final images of a run. We use two lenses, a 35 millimeter for large specimens and 100 millimeter for small specimens. There's also a telecentric lens that you can use for large specimens to stitch together to eliminate the parallax you would get with a normal lens. The camera is programmed to take images at various intervals from the base of the stage to just above the highest point of the specimen or vial, so that in the final stacked image, both the labels and the specimens are in focus. The number of specimens, images per cell is a predetermined trade-off between the desired resolution and the processing speed. This system uses Xyrene Stacker to stack the images, which is what you're seeing here. The final images are then stored in a folder with the taxon name of that group being imaged. And then we use Barcode Filer to rename all the images in that folder with the barcode. And that's what you're seeing here, so you can kind of watch it happening in real time. We then use actions in Photoshop to record the placement of those objects from that original cell into the first image. And any other shared, if you have shared labels, and we then insert the shared labels into all the images. And then we use the automate batch function to batch update the images in that run or folder. And that's what you're seeing here. So it's kind of cool. It actually goes relatively quickly to like put all the scale bars in. All right. So for larger specimens, we have a separate setup with a copy stand, and we take only a couple of images per specimen. Here you see Natalia working on larger crustacea. We use a 35 to 65 millimeter lens for these specimens, as it gives more flexibility to handle the variety of specimen sizes and jar sizes. Once these images have been stacked, renamed, and updated, we have two CSV files to create the multimedia records and the specimen catalog records in the database. And with like information like image title, taxon name, conservation treatment, license use, photographer, etc. So that all can get uploaded into the database, and you automatically have these like skeletal records. And then a third file actually attaches the image to the catalog record. So now you have a catalog record with the image of the specimen. That's that. So once this is completed, and the records have been created in the database, the AI team picks up the images and submits them to either Google Gemini or ChatGPT with a customized prompt or script for the desired verbatim transcription of the specimen labels. The prompt instructs AI what the format output should be, that the first column should contain the file name, which is the data matrix code, which is again used to import the data back into the database. We then instruct that the verbatim text is preceded by the words AI generated transcription. And I don't know why it's not moving forward. Hold on. Oops, hold on. Anyway, there was some stuff there, but it's not showing, but that's okay. Anyway, it was just showing you this process here. So anyway, we instruct that the verbatim text is preceded by the words AI generated transcription with the date that the transcription was done. So it's clear that the information in the verbatim field is AI generated versus human transcribed and when the transcription was done. We tell it to separate lines on a label with a single pipe bar and separate multiple labels in an image with a double pipe bar, and to preserve all the characters as they appear, like sex symbols, diacritical marks, etc. And to preserve UTF encoding. So the results of this. By using the robotic imaging system, we were able to increase the number of specimens imaged in database per day threefold and improve the quality of the images significantly. By replacing transcriptions of label information from human effort to AI OCR, we realized a 30-fold increase in transcription rates. It took volunteers 315 hours to transcribe text from around 7,000 images of specimen labels, so they produced roughly 22 transcriptions per hour. When the volunteers submitted images to Google Gemini or ChatGPT with our specific prompt, they produced over 11,000 transcriptions in 19 hours, so about 87 transcriptions per hour. And the accuracy of these transcriptions was also quite high. Of the remaining errors, of the records that had errors, there was no difference between human and AI transcriptions in the number of records that had between 1 and 20 errors. Of the records that had greater than 20 errors per transcription, AI fared worse. However, in both cases with the AI and human errors with greater than 20 errors per transcription, they were generally human errors because either a transcription was being posted to the wrong record, or a human was looking at the wrong image and posting it to the wrong catalog record. The power of AI is clearly transformative. It works. It saves our transcribers from many ailments associated with verbatim transcriptions, bad back, sore hands, and eye strain, and it also allows us to focus on other tasks. We are only at the incipient stages of the full potential. For images with consistent fields, such as this card catalog, we can easily parse the textual information into columns to populate the standardized fields. For slide images, we added a second prompt to have AI count the number of specimens on a slide, and it could even tell us whether the specimens were full or segments of a body part. And even more exciting, we're starting to develop protocols using AI to help find geographical coordinates for localities. We can include information like species names, collectors' names, and dates of collections to help AI provide this information. And then AI also gives you back the method that was used to get those coordinates as well as the source. Now, obviously, not all is perfect in the AI world. Parsing your record doesn't necessarily mean the data entry is going to be any easier if you have a relational or object relational database. But you can search on standardized words in those verbatim fields and then populate light records that you retrieve with that information. Also, once a transcription error is made and not caught, the system does learn that error as being correct, and the error then propagates and becomes stronger. So in this image here, I don't know if you can see it, it says trigona and encircled as a 10. That 10 was interpreted as a female symbol, and then it didn't matter what, after this record was like mistakenly identified as a female symbol, all the other records past that, then anything that had that circle was interpreted as a female symbol. But once you correct it, it then goes back and fixes it. But again, even though it's incorrect, at least we now have an image with our specimen. Errors can be seen and corrected. Also, and I'm almost done, and TIFF images don't work well at all. If you're trying to use TIFF images, you get kind of a lot of garbage. Stick with JPEG. And having said all of this, as amazing and powerful as these tools are, human effort is obviously still essential, and it really takes a team. I want to give a shout out to Natalia, Giovanni, and Kyle for making that video, to Ellen and Aaron for coming to me in June and saying, hey, Chris, we should try ChatGPT. And I kind of shunned the idea because I had tried Abby Finereader with not very good results, but their tenacity actually led to this kind of groundbreaking work. I'd also like to thank NSF for the funding that allowed us to get to this point and to digitize over 85,000 specimens. And I will take any questions if we have time, and feel free to reach out to me. One question? Oh, I guess I have time for one question. So the question was, when working with these handwritten specimens, whether we had to train it to recognize the handwriting. And in some cases, yes. So for example, when you first start and it gets it wrong and it says CU period XD, and you say, no, that should be WYGOD period for Wide-Gazinski. It's like, okay, I learned that, it's Wide-Gazinski, and then going forward, I will recognize that Y, which I thought was a J, is now a Y, and going forward, so yes. So can I answer one more, because someone else had one? Yeah. Okay, the question was, how do we deal with labels on the backside? When we use the robotic imaging system, if there's information on the backside, we keep one cell blank, and then we transfer over the barcode label and then turn the label that needs to be read on the backside on that. So then you have those images with the same barcode A and B, and you have both sides of the information. Yeah. All right, that's it. Okay, and thanks.